Great. So firstly, thanks Nabil for having me. I appreciate the opportunity. This is definitely outside of my wheelhouse, so people bear with me. Just looking at a skill development today, having a holistic approach. So learning outcomes, like you to understand the holistic approach when developing an athlete, and also to learn activity structures that can help you develop athlete skills. So first of all, we have to start off with our context. This is a great little formula here that I stole from Mike McKay. So we have to think about who are we working with? Who is the athlete as an individual? But before the athlete, we have to think about them as a person. So we have to get to know them as a human being. And once we've done that, we can then start to consider why they're playing basketball. So it could be that they are just playing for fun, just for participation purposes. They want to play with their friends. Or it could be that they have long-term aspirations of maybe a US scholarship, playing professionally, national team. There's lots of different whys. But once we have those two things, then that determines what and how we do things. So what happens on the court, but also what happens off the court. That's going to be different with when we consider who and why. And then the how, it's the art and the science of coaching. And I would say I lean more towards it being more of an art than it is a science. So stand-up comedy and coaching. So I tried to draw some parallels between stand-up comedians and coaches. I think that great skill development coaches have some characteristics that are very similar to stand-up comedians. So knowing their audience, stand-up comedians, they have to understand who they're talking to and also be adaptive with the audience that they're performing in front of. And that helps them to stay relevant. I got the TikTok sign there. So for you guys that are coaching younger athletes, you have to understand where they are and what's important to them. So at the moment, it's TikTok. That helps you to stay relevant, to stay current with your athletes. But that's not just staying relevant to your athletes. You got to stay relevant in the coaching game. You got to understand what new practices are and move with the times. And then being a great storyteller. Great comedians are great storytellers, and they always take you on a journey. And that creates an emotional connection. So it's really important for us to do that as coaches. They're also really good at using analogies, and that's something that we have to be good at too. And then they're also very observant. They're constantly scanning their environment every day to come up with new jokes, new material. And that's what we have to do as coaches. We have to be observant with our athletes so that we can give the best that we can to them. And then perseverance. Coaching is a long journey, and skill development is a long journey too. And it's not a straight line. There's going to be ups, there's going to be downs, there's going to be turns in the road. So we have to stay patient. Like the stand-up comedian, they have to stay patient as well. They have to perfect their act and do it over and over again, and then they get the Netflix show. And obviously this is Dave Chappelle on the side, one of the greats in my opinion. Yeah, we'll see in the chat if that's true or not. And then great timing. Stand-up comedians need to have exceptional timing so that they are able to deliver the punchline at the right time. And they also have to have an element of surprise, like the Jack in the Box there. It's the same as with coaching. You need to also have an element of surprise. You need to sprinkle new things in. And so with the stand-up comedians, so you have all those characteristics, and you have all those characteristics as a coach, that will help you then to build the connection with your athlete. So we're talking about that emotional, the emotion piece and how important that is. You need to be able to relate with your athletes, know the audience, great timing, like all of these things are going to help you to build a connection with your athlete. And then the holistic approach, we have to consider that each person that we're working with, the person before the athlete, we have to consider that they have a lot of different influences in their lives. And I'm not talking about influences as in social media, I'm talking about the coaches that they have. So it could be the school coach, it could be the club coach, it could be the national team coach. Like all those coaches have different ways of doing things, and we have to understand that they have an influence on our athlete that we're working with. Their schooling or work, same situation, their athletic development, so that could be mental performance, that could be physios, that could be strength and conditioning. We have to consider all of those too. And then their family and friends. The parents of kids that we work with, they're the biggest investors in their child. So we have to consider that, and we have to be aligned with them and make sure that they understand why we do what we do. So when we're talking about skill development, I think it's really important that we come to some sort of definition around skill. And this is the perception and action coupling. Now, perception is what do we see in our environment? And then we couple that with the action. So what is the movement solution, the actual technique? So those two things have to work together and harmoniously. And the bridge between those two is the decision making. So that's how we choose the solution. And this happens very fast. And this diagram here is obviously, this is 2K. This shows that there's multiple solutions in the game of basketball. So this player here could drive to his left into that double gap, or he could make a pass swing to swing across to number 21, or he could throw it in the post. There's just multiple options and multiple solutions in the game. So how can we work on this in our practice environment? So this is based off of Mike McKay's phasing of drills. And so I've kind of adapted this to make it a little bit more simple. So we have the scripting of drills. So that's learning the movement solution through repetitions with no opposition. That's just purely working on the movement and the technique. And then we have guided drills. So that's adding decision making by using guided defense or offense. And then we have compete. So that's playing within the game context with constraints or without constraints. And you can see here that I've just put a load of lines everywhere, a load of arrows. And that's because this isn't a linear process. We don't go straight from scripting it to guiding it to then competing. That's not how this works. Sometimes we'll play the whole game, we'll play 5-on-5, and then we'll identify a problem within that game. We'll say, okay, whoever we're working with, Lisa can't handle the ball under pressure. So then we figure out, okay, is it a technique problem? Do we need to add more tools to the toolkit? Or is it that she's not using the correct dribble in a certain situation? Okay, so then maybe we can guide it and work on those decisions. So as you can see, it's not a linear process, and you're always going to dip in and out of these three categories when it comes to your practice design. So scripting. When we script, that's best used when we're learning a new technique. So a baby needs to crawl before they can stand up, before they can walk. Actually, my girlfriend did challenge me on this. Some babies don't crawl. So that's how it shows that it's different for each individual learner. High repetitions equals increased confidence. I'm going to show a video in a second that's going to illustrate that. And then consider the game context. Where is your starting location? If you're starting from a location that you wouldn't start from in a game, then why are you doing it? So we need to consider this. Do we start in motion, so dynamically, or are we static? And then we also need to consider game actions. Are we coming off of a cut? Are we screening? Are we coming off of a screen? And then combinations of those techniques that we can work on in sequence. So I'm going to show a video now. So I actually got this
planning for how he shoots? Does he think?
Got this expression from Russ McMain, and he talked about basketball Tai Chi. And so obviously this is Stephen Curry doing his pre-game routine. Now, this is really good to build the confidence and go through the movement patterns. However, just like Tai Chi, Tai Chi is really good for relaxation and getting in a meditative state, but it's not an effective solution in a real fight. Just like when we're preparing for a game and we're going through the motions, we're in this scripted way of playing. Yes, it's going to help us with our confidence, but it's not going to help us with the decision making in the game and the actual competition itself. It is an important part of developing skill, but we need to consider that we need to be looking at alternative ways for us to work on the skills. That's the perception and the action coupled together. So we go back to this. Okay, so when we script, we want to have a success criteria. So the success criteria is basically what measurement can we look at to see if we are moving the needle on that. So we want to have 3 points of emphasis, no more than 3, could be less than 3. And then we want the attention of the athletes to be on the technique. So if we're working on a blast cut, catch, and a rip to the baseline, but we're looking at the footwork. So the footwork could be crossover step. So that's going to be our attention as a coach. That's what we're looking at, the technique. And then the outcome versus the process, this can differ depending on what we want to work on. So if we're looking at trying to make as many shots as possible, then we're going to be looking at the outcome. So we might have a time and a score on things. If we're looking at the process, then again, we could be concentrating on the follow through or the footwork. So we got to decide whether we want to look at the outcome or the process. And then how do we load this? So how do we make this harder and easier? We can increase or decrease the speed. We can increase or decrease the technique, and same with the contact. Just because we're scripting something doesn't mean that we can't have a body in the way, or we can't use a foam roller to simulate height and length. So we can also do these kind of things to load this in. And then just briefly on feedback, it needs to be specific to the success criteria. If it's not something that you spoke about in your points of emphasis, then you shouldn't be coaching it. And then the question that we want to ask is, how did that feel? So guiding, we're working on the visual cues. Now, when we do this is our perception. When we do this, we're going to use our body, or we could use signals, which will then create the decision for the athlete. But when we do this, we have to consider that it needs to be representative of the game. So there's no point in me doing a guide that is holding up a colored cone. Although that's really good for our cognitive load, it's not actually going to happen in a game. So we need to have positions where we're actually replicating and simulating the game. And then this helps us to apply the skill. So it actually helps us to put the perception, what we see, and then the action together. And so I'm going to show you another video now. Actually, I'm going to show you a couple of videos. So this one here, this is a player here, Kate Oliver, that I've worked with. So this is scripting. We're looking at the hook shot just inside the charge circle there. Okay, we're working on her feet landing inside out, and we're working on a release, trying to extend all the way to the top, snap the wrist. And here is a situation where we're guiding this halo finishing. That's what we called it. So now it's going to be, if she has space, so if I stay off of her, she's going to go into a hook shot finish. If I take away her space, so I jam her up, I wall her up, then she's going to go into a double pivot to finish past me.
If you have space, go for it. If I take away space, then you're on double pivot. Here. Always trying to get the first one. Oh. No. There you go. Around me. If you have.
So I don't know if you guys could hear that, but I actually didn't need to coach her in that instance because she already knew, like, I didn't take away the space. She needed to go straight up. So she could identify that herself. Okay, so when we do a guided drill, we want to establish the success criteria. Again, 3 points of emphasis, no more than 3, and the attention is on the decision making, not on the technique. We can have maybe 1 point of emphasis on the technique, but we want our main focus to be on the decision. Was it the correct decision? And that is a process-driven outcome. Did we make the right decision? Then, with our lows, we can have an either-or decision, which is an example I just showed you. Or we could have 3 decisions. Now, this is actually, from the research, a little bit more valuable when it comes to transfer retention to the game. So we can add 3 decisions. So an example of that would be, if I close out short, you're shooting it. If I close out and take away the left side, then you drive right. If I close out, take away the right side, then you drive left. So that would be an example of adding 3 decisions to the guides. And then we can increase and decrease our deception and pressure. So the guide can be a little bit more sneaky and try and trick the person who's playing offense or defense. And we can change the amount of pressure that the guide gives as well. That's changing the distance usually is the way that we do that. Or we could be overt with our contact. We could put our hands on and really make it difficult for them. So then the feedback, again, has to be specific to the success criteria. And then we want the feedback to be between reps as much as possible. Now the question is, what did you see? You want to draw attention to the perceptual piece. What did they see in their environment? And then compete. So with our compete, there's 2 different ways that Mike McKay actually breaks this down very well. So it's execute under pressure and execute in game. And my interpretation of that is executing under pressure is in the practice environment. We want to add pressure, and that's not just physical pressures in terms of where the defender is, how much contact there is, those kind of things. It's also the mental performance piece. So we're adding pressure with putting a time and score up, or we're adding pressure with maybe some game-like trash talk, whatever the case may be. So that's how we do it in the practice environment, and I'll get to that a little bit later too. Executing in the game. Obviously, the game, you have the crowd, you have referees, and it's the full 5-on-5. There's less coaching interventions, so there's less bailout in terms of the players having to get over their mistakes quickly and get to the next possession. So when we simulate executing in game in practice, we have to take that into consideration as well. And as much as possible when we're in compete, we want to coach on the fly. Let's just go back briefly. So I want to show you guys another video. So just going back to scripting, and I spoke about combinations. So this is an example of sequencing some skills together. This is called a 3-shot combo. This is something that I stole from Sefi Bernard, who's the play development coach at the Washington Mystics. So here, Ash, she's one of our players from a couple of years back. She's coming off pin down screen into a curl cut. And she's relocated to the corner, 3, and then she was attacking the closeout. So that, guys, I wanted to show you that because the closeout that I did was not game representative, because there was just too big of a gap. Like, I needed to be closer to her for it to actually be an effective closeout within the context of the game. So I just wanted to show you that because I feel like it's important when we're scripting or guiding things. We want to make sure that it looks as real as possible so that the players understand where the position of the defense is and how then they need to react. Okay, so our success criteria, again, sticking to 3 points of emphasis as much as possible. We want to be as process driven as we can. So we don't concern ourselves with the make and miss. We focus more on, was it the right shot to take? And was that a good possession offensively, defensively, based on what our style of play and principles are? And then the game is multi-solution. There's multiple solutions in the game. It's a multi-solutions game. So if we see a player do something that is maybe out of our comfort zone as coaches, then we have to accept that, because they might have seen something different. Like, we didn't have their viewpoint. So always, and that's the really important part of asking questions, is you need to find out what your players are seeing and understand their perceptual cues. So the lows on this, constraints are absolutely the key to this. This is something that Troy spoke about very well. Constraints on the game, we can give you less time. We can advantage, disadvantage, so more players, less players. We can have score advantages based on personnel, let's say. So that if this player scores, it's worth 5 as opposed to 2. So there's ways that we can constrain the game that will help with this. We can go small-sided, or we can go 5-on-5. So 5-on-5 is obviously the big compete portion, but we can also scale it back depending on the needs of our athletes. And again, multi-solutions game. So lastly, feedback. Again, it's got to be specific to that success criteria. We got to coach on the fly as much as possible. So we can do that by subs and in stoppages in play. So having games that are refereed and controlled in that manner so that we understand where our interventions could be as coaches, and we're getting the reps within our practice. And then questions, problem and solution. So if we identify a problem, let's talk about the solution with our players and try and get them to come up with the answer. You might have your own ideas of what the answer may be, but let's prompt our players into thinking the game by asking them the question. So I think I'm a little bit under here, but I guess that's good. So in summary, it's about the person before the athlete. We have to treat everyone as an individual, and the athlete is secondary to the person. Like we need to get to know them and have an understanding of what their needs are. Skill development is not a linear process. It's going to take you in a lot of different directions. But if you have a solid framework that can help you to build an athlete, and then enjoy the process of learning. I'm learning right now because this is definitely not my wheelhouse, and presenting is something that's new to me and I need to be comfortable with. But just enjoy the process. Like, find ways for it to be fun. And if you're not enjoying coaching, then why are you doing it? If you're not enjoying helping people grow, then yeah, I'm not really sure what to say to you, but you got to find a way for it to be fun for you and for the athletes. And thank the pastor, Nabil, Rend Sports Academy. Thanks for the opportunity here today. And these are some of the people that really helped me with this presentation in particular. There's a lot of people that I consider to be mentors who I know, and also from afar that I just observe online. But definitely surround yourself with good people, and yeah, follow the people that are gonna help you and help you with your philosophy, and sometimes follow the people that are a little bit against what you think as well. But yeah, there's some of the guys that helped me with this. My contact information is there. Any questions, let me know. Fire away.
Great. Thank you, Ash. Really good stuff there. Just to everybody, yes, who's tuned in, if you have any questions, just fire them away right now and we'll get Ash to answer them. Also, Coach Mike Toolan is still on, so we can answer them there. One thing, Ash, I apologize, actually, when you came on and you started, I did not give you an intro, so my apologies there, but guys, Ash Cookson, assistant coach with the GB Under-20 Women's program, just finished up as with Arkadia University Women's Basketball program there, the season gone as well. So really good that he could join us. Ash, let me ask you there first thing. When you talked about the scripted phase, you mentioned as part of your feedback process, you'd ask the players, how did that feel? Can you expand on that a little bit so that I guess everybody's got an idea of what we're talking about?
Yeah, I think that the more I've been kind of researching this stuff, is there's not like, there is an optimum model when it comes to technique, but there also isn't. Like, it's a very gray area. So I like to ask athletes how it feels, because it gives me a gauge of whether it feels comfortable to them. And obviously, if something feels uncomfortable because it's the first time you're doing it, then that's probably why. But if it continues to be an issue, for example, if you're trying to correct something technique wise in a shot is the obvious one, and you're cueing an athlete to do something like internal, so let's say like they got to get their elbow in line, which I don't necessarily agree with anyway, but that sometimes that's the case for some coaches. But if you have a gauge on whether that's comfortable or not, I think usually you're going to either change direction with it or stick with it and try and stay the course. So that's kind of why I asked him how it feels, because some cueing, like some of the ways that you coach just doesn't resonate with an athlete. So you might have to try and find another way to get what you want out of it. I don't know whether that answers your question, honestly.
I mean, I think it does answer, but it does answer, and obviously, if some of the attendees, want to expand on that, they can fire us a question. Question is going out to both of you guys right now, but we'll start with Coach Cookson. You will answer it first, and then we'll get Coach Toolan's opinion there. The question is, what's the biggest challenge in developing player-coach relationships? Coach Cookson, can you start with that?
Yeah. I think the biggest challenge for me is the amount of time I get to be in front of my athletes sometimes. Like, I think that is the hardest thing. So just to give you context around that. So last year, the last 3 years, I was with the Leicester Riders. So that's a professional team in England, professional women's team. And it's also connected to a university program. So you get a lot of face time with the players. And that helps build relationships so much faster because you just get to be in conversations. Whereas this year, I've been with Arkadia University, it was an hour commute to Arkadia and then an hour back. So there was way less time that I had. I would just turn up for practice 5 minutes before, and then I'm in the practice and then I leave again. So it was really hard for me that was my biggest barrier, I would say. What was the question?
Just the biggest challenge there in developing player-coach relationships.
Yeah, I think time, honestly. Yeah, short answer.
Perfect. Coach Toolan, can you give us your thoughts there?
Yeah, really good question. One of the things I think you need to recognize when you're talking about a coach-player relationship is that you're in a position of leadership, so you don't necessarily have to like this person to lead them well, and you don't even necessarily have to be you don't have to be friends with them to develop a good positive relationship with them. And sometimes I think I've made this mistake in the past, and I probably talked to other coaches who have made this mistake, but thinking that I don't really get along with that person, and then creating this barrier in the relationship, thinking there's no point trying to develop that relationship further. So I think that's one thing to recognize, that okay, you might not really get along with this person, you might not want to hang out with this person, but you can still have a very positive relationship there. Yeah, I think maybe one other thing would be the like where the players' goals are at. So I think understanding your athlete, like Ashley said it really well at the start of his presentation about understanding your audience, understanding your person before the athlete, and as a consequence of that, understanding their individual goals a little bit more. Because I think whenever I've had a major problem, it's been when the goals of the athlete have conflicted with the goals of the group. And so when you understand them, maybe you can do something about that. Now, maybe you still can't, but you have a chance, I think.
Yes. Perfect. I'm just kind of thinking about, this player coach, obviously, relationship that the question was asked. It just gets me back to thinking about the time that obviously I've had in my relationships with my players. I've generally found a little bit of both, where the time constraints make a huge difference. And when I spend more time with a player, generally we have a better relationships than over long time, and it lasts years, which is really interesting because the players that I have more contact with are usually the more troublesome, wild players, because I got to reprimand them or pull them back in more and more. And then these are the players that I end up having a really good relationship with over a long time. Do you guys, in your experience, have something similar, or is that just an outlier?
No, like I completely agree. Conflict is something that I like Nabil knows this, it's something that I don't really shy away from. And I think that that can be valuable in the long term. Like short term is going to suck because players not talking to you for X number of weeks. Like I've had that happen to me. But the relationship that you built off the back of that is priceless. And yeah, there's better ways of doing it than I have experienced, and I've definitely learned other ways to go about having those difficult conversations. But yeah, I think that helped me early on, actually, that I was brave enough to just, no, I'm just going to say it how I see it at this point and not be on the fence about it, because if I'm on the fence about it, then I don't have an opportunity to be right or to be wrong. So then I can learn from that if I just, tell it how it is, just speak my truths. And yeah, I think that's helped me and the relationships, definitely.
Gotcha. And Coach Tulin, what are your thoughts right there on that?
No, I would agree with you. I would certainly have players who have been troublesome and you end up building that rapport. But I would say it's funny as well, because I'm after talking 40 minutes about being positive and positive team culture and all this, but the conflict is so important and so critical to being productive as a team and having a good team culture, that I think it's just critical. But you make it constructive conflict and that. But I think it's so important to have that challenging and that conflict, ongoing, because I think it is going to be overall over the longer term, it is going to help your team kind of push forward and stuff. But yeah, I would have that experience. Absolutely, yeah.
But I do think that you can have positive conflict, and that's something that, again, it's just how do we do that and how do we manage that, which could be a whole different conversation. Let me just come back to this, guys. So with our current situation, Ash, yourself, with myself, we might have, I guess, a little bit more contact time with our players than coaches on the ground floor and the grassroots. So if time is a barrier to building great player-coach relationships, what would be some practical ways that we can overcome that? Coach Tulin, can you give me your thoughts there first?
Yeah, so I mentioned being a little bit creative about how we're dealing with limited constraints in terms of the practice time available, at the grassroots level, right? So I was talking about being creative in addressing that. So in terms of even doing your warm-ups a bit early, or I was saying we used to bring them in a bit earlier, and we had a classroom, and that way you can add time onto your gym time. So it's not, the hour and a half you have on the court is not the end of what you can possibly do. One thing we did with the younger groups, we take them away to a Super League game to give them that experience. So they're going to something to watch it as a group, and it's not something that they maybe have experienced before, or it's the first context where you're with them and they're together as a group, but not in a basketball context. It's in a more relaxed context and stuff like that. So I think that's one thing, is to be creative in the solutions you find to that. And then and I think you have to have a mentality of make the most of what you have. 1 week before our the lockdown, I had a conversation with a coach. We played them in a game and we won the game, and the coach came over and said to me, that's what happens when we only have 3 hours, or I think it was 3 hours training a week. And I kind of said, okay, that's but our team only had 2.5 hours, and he didn't realize that. I didn't say it to him, but it's not so much what you have, but what you make of it, and how you're creative about it. And we stretched that 2.5 hours into, we added a gym session, we added, so and obviously adding that time gives you time to build those relationships. So I think it's just about being creative and trying to think of new ideas where you can kind of add time.
Perfect. Coach Cookson, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, were you referring to the current times and obviously with the COVID-19 situation, or was it more like a general question?
More general, more general. I mean, we can talk specifically about COVID-19 if you'd like, but more general.
Yeah, I was just thinking along the lines of like this kind of how things are right now is really, it's allowing us as coaches to do things like this. And there's no reason why we can't do things like that with players as well. You know, like I've seen a lot of great Alex Sarama EA. He's done some really good stuff with the players. To video sessions, had like guest speakers come in, done some Kahoot quizzes. Yeah, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, we have more time to do these kind of things to build rapport amongst teammates now because we've got less things going on in our day-to-day lives. So yeah, this is a really good opportunity to do those kind of things. And also for me, it's a good opportunity to learn from guys like yourself about how we can best use our time to connect with our athletes.
Perfect. You know, it's funny because one of the things, like you said, from Coach Alex Sarama, and he'll be on actually talking on the Rend Online Coaches Clinic later on in the week. But you've seen his stuff, and you can see them constantly on Zoom together and stuff like that. I want to highlight one of the Irish coaches that I've seen. Meteor's coach, Aaron O'Connell. He posted something on Twitter where his team was, I think it was a regular Zoom chat, and they were playing a game. I'm not sure the details of the game or anything, but that's something that we're doing now because of our situation. However, we can take that during the regular season and also try and incorporate that, whether it's Kahoot or whether it's, you know, sometime during the week when we don't have court time, we can still do that and build those relationships. So I do agree that just being creative with it helps really. I've got another question here for Coach Toolan. The question really is, how was your season with the under-17 Liffey Celtics team? I feel like there's something there that I'm not fully sure about, but there you go.
Well, it was, you know what the unfortunate thing was? It was really looking up as soon as we as soon as the lockdown came. We had beaten first and second in the league just before, so we were really on the upswing. We had a great season. We had a really great season. It was really fun. So this was my first season with them, and they're a wonderful group, really talented group, really great guys. But we had, you know, it was a challenge because it was the first season, and a lot of the things that I talked about in terms of the presentation were a bit were at play, you know, like building those new processes, getting to know guys individually, you know, establishing those kind of norms. And so it was a process that what I found was we were really up and down. We had some really impressive performances. We had really poor performances. And I think part of that is the way the way I was operating the team, and that they had a lot of freedom to play. So there was a little bit of inconsistency. There was a little bit of still learning the system, and that was really a season-long process. But it was something that you know, I was very happy with where we were going, and you know, I really enjoyed working with all those guys. They were excellent.
Great stuff. Great stuff. We are going to wrap it up there, guys. We're running out of time. Just before I finish, again, I'd like to thank both of you guys for jumping on, making time in your schedules to connect with us. I really do appreciate it, guys, and I think both presentations were excellent. Attendees, really appreciate your time and connecting with us. If you do have any more questions, just tweet them out to us. We'll be sure to get the coaches to answer. The video replays of the previous 2 days, Coach Troy Cully, Coach Darren McGovern, and Stephen English are up on YouTube. You can access those links on our website. We are going to be joined tomorrow by Coach Chris O'Shea. He's the assistant coach of Telekom Baskets Bonn in the German Bundesliga. And then following him on after he presents, it's Aoife Callahan, sports psychologist, who will be talking about facilitating athlete self-regulation, which I think is going to be really interesting as well. So really do make sure you guys tune in tomorrow night as well. All right, other than that, really appreciate everybody's time. Thank you, guys. Have a great evening.
Thanks, everyone.